The ancient being known as Zephyrak had not felt moisture touch his throat in 97 years, for months and 16 days. He kept precise count because pain had a way of making time feel both eternal and fleeting. His massive form lay coiled within the crystalline caverns of Xerion Prime, a planet that had once been an ocean world before the great solar flares turned it into a desert wasteland. Zephyrak's scales, once brilliant emerald and blue like the seas of his youth, had faded to a dull gray. Each breath felt like swallowing sand. His elongated neck, which could once stretch gracefully across vast distances, now lay heavy against the cavern floor. The dragon's eyes, dim golden orbs that had witnessed the rise and fall of 3 civilizations, tracked the movements of his captors with weary resignation. The hegemony had found him during their expansion across this sector. Not the old hegemony of stories, but the new corporate alliance that strip-mined worlds for profit. When they discovered that Zephyrak's body naturally produced a rare crystalline substance in his scales when under extreme stress, they saw opportunity. The substance, called Dracorium, could power their fastest ships and most advanced weapons. Commander Vex, a thin humanoid with pale blue skin and silver implants covering half his face, visited the cavern daily. He would stand just outside the energy barriers that kept Zephyrak contained and observe the dragons suffering with clinical detachment. The barriers were designed specifically to prevent any moisture from reaching the ancient creature while still allowing air to flow. "Still alive, I see," Vex would say, making notes on his datapad. "The stress levels are maintaining optimal Dracorium production. We're extracting enough to power an entire battlecruiser every month." The extraction process was agony. Massive machines would scrape away the outermost layer of Zephyrak scales, harvesting the precious crystals that formed there. Without water, his body couldn't properly heal or regenerate. Each scraping left him weaker, more desperate. The hegemony had calculated exactly how much they could take without killing him, keeping him in a perfect balance between life and death. Zephyrak remembered when he was free. He had been the guardian of 3-star systems, protecting smaller species from cosmic threats. His breath could freeze comets or melt asteroids. His roar could be heard across space itself. Now he could barely lift his great head. The irony wasn't lost on him that the very species he had once protected were now among his tormentors. The dragon's thoughts often drifted to water. Not just any water, but the pure, life-giving essence that flowed through his homeworld's great falls. He dreamed of diving deep into cool lakes, of feeling moisture penetrate every scale, of the simple joy of a single drop touching his tongue. These dreams were all that kept his sanity intact. On this particular day, as Commander Vex made his usual rounds, something was different. A new ship had arrived in the orbital station above. Through the cavern's transparent dome, Zephyrak could see the unfamiliar vessel docking. It was smaller than the hegemony's usual craft, rougher around the edges, and bore markings he didn't recognize. "Humans," Vex said with disgust, noticing the dragon's upward gaze. "We're being forced to accept their maintenance services. Apparently, our own engineers can't handle some primitive human technology that's integral to our new mining equipment. Politics." He spat the word like a curse. Zephyrak had heard whispers of humans from other prisoners brought to the facility. They were described as a young species, barely spacefaring for a few centuries. Some called them reckless. Others said they were surprisingly resourceful. Most agreed they were unpredictable. The dragon felt nothing but emptiness at this news. One more species to join his suffering or ignore entirely. The scraping machines activated with their familiar horrible whine. Zephyrak's body tensed automatically as the mechanical arms extended toward his flanks. The pain was excruciating, like having his very soul peeled away layer by layer. He had long since stopped roaring in protest. It only made Vex smile. As the machines worked, Zephyrak noticed movement near the cavern's upper maintenance tunnels. A figure in a simple brown-work suit had emerged from an access panel and was studying the chamber with obvious confusion and growing horror. The figure was smaller than most hegemony species, with pale skin and dark hair. A human. The human's eyes met Zephyrak's across the vast chamber. Instead of the clinical indifference or cruel satisfaction the dragon was used to seeing, these eyes showed something he hadn't witnessed in decades. They showed compassion. The human quickly disappeared back into the maintenance tunnel, but something had changed in that moment. For the first time in nearly a century, Zephyrak felt the faintest stirring of something that wasn't despair. He didn't dare call a hope, not yet, but it was something other than the endless gray of his existence. Commander Vex continued his inspection, unaware that anything significant had occurred. He made his usual notes about Dracorium production levels and walked away, already planning the next day's extraction. The machines finished their work and retracted, leaving Zephyrak bleeding the slow, thick blood of a dehydrated body. But in the maintenance tunnels above, someone was learning terrible truths about what the hegemony had built on Zirian Prime. Someone who came from a species that had never learned to accept the unacceptable, who had a history of standing up to impossible odds when something was fundamentally wrong. The human had seen enough to understand that this wasn't just cruelty, it was systematic torture on a scale that boggled the mind. And if there was one thing humans were known for throughout the galaxy, it was their inability to mind their own business when they witnessed injustice. Zephyrak settled back into his painful rest, unaware that a century of agony was about to be interrupted by the most unlikely of saviors. The dragon closed his ancient eyes and tried to dream of water, just as he had every night for 97 years, for months and 16 days. Marcus Chun had been a starship mechanic for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like the facility on Zirian Prime. What the hegemony called a resource extraction center looked more like a torture chamber designed by engineers with unlimited budgets and no conscience. The human maintenance crew had been brought in because their old Earth Tech diagnostic equipment was somehow the only thing that could properly interface with the mining facility's hybrid systems. Marcus had been crawling through maintenance shafts for 3 days, trying to understand why the hegemony's state-of-the-art facility kept having power fluctuations. What he found instead was a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through a ventilation grate, he had looked down into a cavern where a massive dragon lay imprisoned, being systematically tortured for what appeared to be some kind of industrial process. The creature was enormous, easily 200 feet from nose to tail, but it looked like a shadow of what it should have been. Its scales were gray and dull, its breathing labored, and Marcus could see the raw wounds where machines had scraped away parts of its hide. But what really got to him were the dragon's eyes. They held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient, unmistakably aware of its suffering. Marcus had grown up hearing his grandmother's stories about dragons from old Earth myths. She always said they were wise, ancient beings who deserved respect. Seeing this one reduced to a living factory for whatever those machines were harvesting made his stomach turn with rage. That night, back in the temporary quarters assigned to the human crew, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those golden eyes and the resigned way the dragon had endured what was obviously routine torture. His crewmates were discussing technical problems with the facility's systems, completely unaware of what was happening in the lower levels. "The power draw is massive down in Section 7, said Sarah, the team's senior engineer. "Whatever they're running down there takes more energy than a small city." "I checked Section 7, Marcus said quietly. "It's not what, it's who." He told them what he had seen. The room fell silent. Jake, the youngest member of their crew, was the first to speak. "That's impossible. The Galactic Conventions prohibit torture of sentient beings. The hegemony signed those treaties. The conventions have a lot of loopholes when it comes to resource extraction and non-citizen entities," Sarah replied grimly. "If this dragon isn't officially recognized as a citizen of any member world, technically it has no legal protections." Marcus stood up and walked to the small porthole that looked out over the facility. "I don't care about legal technicalities. That creature is being tortured to death, and it's been going on for decades by the look of it." "What are you thinking, Marcus?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. I'm thinking the thing hasn't had water in God knows how long. I saw the containment barriers. They're designed to keep moisture out as much as to keep the dragon in. Marcus, no, Jake said immediately. We can't interfere with hegemony operations. They'll arrest us, or worse. And it won't help the dragon anyway. Maybe it won't help in the long run, Marcus admitted. But nobody should die of thirst. Nobody. Marcus had grown up on a water-scarce colony world. He knew what real thirst felt like, and he had seen people die from dehydration. The idea of someone suffering from thirst for nearly a century was beyond horrific to him. It violated something fundamental about what he believed was right and wrong. The next morning, Marcus volunteered for the maintenance rotation in Section 7. Commander Vex escorted him personally, clearly suspicious of human motives. Your people have a reputation for being unpredictable, Vex said as they descended in the lift. I trust you understand that what you see here is classified hegemony business. Of course, sir, Marcus replied with a neutral tone he had perfected during his years working for various alien employers. I just need to check the power coupling systems that are causing the fluctuations. The cavern was even more horrible in person than it had been through the ventilation grate. The dragon lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its breathing. The machines were silent for now, but Marcus could see the fresh scrape marks on the creature's flanks. As Marcus worked on the power systems, he became aware that the dragon was watching him. When their eyes met directly, Marcus saw something that made his heart break. The dragon looked away quickly, as if it had learned not to expect kindness from the small creatures that maintained its prison. Marcus spent the day mapping every system in Section 7, learning how the containment worked, where the barriers drew their power, and, most importantly, where the water recycling systems were located. The facility used water for cooling various systems, but none of it ever reached the dragon's chamber. In fact, there were specific filters designed to remove every trace of moisture from the air that entered the containment area. That evening, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't free the dragon, not yet, but he could give it something it had been denied for a century. The most basic necessity of life. He spent hours planning his approach. The water recycling systems had manual overrides for maintenance purposes. If he could redirect one of the coolant lines just for a few minutes, he could get water into the dragon's chamber. It would only be temporary, and there would be consequences, but Marcus found he didn't care about consequences anymore. Late that night, when the facility was running on minimal staff, Marcus made his way back to Section 7. He had smuggled in a portable plasma cutter and a small water container from the human crew's personal supplies. His heart was pounding as he accessed the coolant system's manual controls. The dragon was awake when Marcus entered the chamber through a maintenance access. It watched him with those ancient, weary eyes, probably expecting another form of torment. Marcus approached slowly, the water container in his hands clearly visible. I'm not going to hurt you, Marcus said softly, even though he wasn't sure if the dragon could understand human speech. I brought you something. The dragon's eyes fixed on the water container with an intensity that was almost physical. Marcus realized that the creature understood exactly what he was carrying. Marcus walked to the edge of the containment field and began working on the barrier projector with his plasma cutter. It was dangerous work. If the field destabilized wrong, it could kill both of them. But as he worked, he could feel the dragon's hope building like a tangible thing in the air. After several tense minutes, Marcus managed to create a small gap in the barrier, just large enough to pass the water container through. He looked up at the massive dragon and held up the container. It's not much, he said, but it's clean and it's yours. What happened next would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. The ancient dragon, this massive being that could have snapped him in half without effort, lowered its great head with infinite care and gentleness. Its eyes never left Marcus's face as it extended its tongue to the water. The moment the water touched the dragon's tongue, a sound escaped its throat that was part sigh, part cry, and part something that might have been a sob. It was the sound of a being experiencing something precious that had been denied for so long it had become mythical. The dragon drank slowly, savoring every drop. When the container was empty, It looked at Marcus with an expression that clearly conveyed gratitude beyond words. Then it did something unexpected. It spoke. "Thank you." The words came out in perfect Standard Galactic, spoken in a voice like distant thunder. Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin, not because the dragon had spoken, but because of the sheer emotion contained in those two simple words. "You can talk," Marcus said, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "I have not spoken in 37 years, Zephyrak replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. There seemed little point when the only listeners were those who enjoyed my suffering. The dragon's great head moved closer to Marcus, though still separated by the barrier. "What are you called, small friend?" "Marcus Chun. And you're not small anything. What's your name?" "I am Zephyrak, last guardian of the Trinary systems, protector of small worlds, keeper of ancient oaths." The dragon's voice carried a weight of history and loss, though those titles mean little now. Marcus found himself sitting cross-legged on the cavern floor, looking up at this massive being who spoke with the dignity of old nobility despite his terrible circumstances. "How long have you been here?" 97 years, for months, 17 days, Zephyrak said without hesitation. "Today marks the first time in all those days that I have tasted water." The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. "My God, how are you even alive? My kind can survive much longer without water than most species, but survival is not the same as living. Each day has been an eternity of thirst." Zephyrak's eyes closed for a moment. "Tell me, Marcus Chun, what brings humans to this place of suffering?" Marcus explained about the maintenance contract, about how Earth's old technology was somehow needed for the hegemony systems. As he talked, he found himself telling Zephyrak about his life, his family, his grandmother's stories about dragons. The ancient being listened with the attention of someone who hadn't heard a friendly voice in decades. "Your grandmother was wise," Zephyrak said when Marcus finished. "My people were guardians once, protectors of the smaller and weaker. We considered it our highest calling." His voice turned bitter. "Perhaps that was our mistake. It made us easy targets when a universe decided it no longer wanted guardians. What happened to the others of your kind? Dead, enslaved, or fled to the dark spaces between stars. I was the last to fall." Zephyrak's massive head turned toward the extraction machines. "They found that our bodies produce valuable crystals when under extreme stress and dehydration. Dracorium, they call it. My suffering powers their ships and weapons." Marcus felt a rage building in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. "That's not extraction. That's torture for profit." "Indeed, but legal torture according to the treaties they hide behind." Zephyrak's eyes met Marcus's again. "Why did you risk yourself to bring me water? Your people gain nothing from my comfort." Marcus thought about the question for a long moment. "Because it was right. Because nobody should suffer like this. Because my grandmother always said that how we treat the helpless says everything about who we really are." "Wisdom beyond her species' years," Zephyrak said softly. "In my long life, I have learned that there are two types of beings in the universe. Those who see suffering and turn away, and those who see suffering and act. Your grandmother raised you to be the second kind." They talked through the night. Zephyrak told Marcus stories of the old days, when dragons freely flew between stars, and whole civilizations looked to them for protection. Marcus shared stories of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs, of their stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be done. "Your people sound much like dragons were in the early days," Zephyrak observed. "Perhaps that is why you alone showed kindness." As dawn approached on Zirian Prime, Marcus knew he had to leave before the day shift arrived. But he also knew he couldn't walk away from this. The water had only been the beginning. "I'm coming back," he promised. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to find a way to help you properly." "Small friend," Zephyrak said gently, "I'm grateful beyond measure for what you have already done. But do not sacrifice yourself for me. I am old and tired. You have a life ahead of you. My grandmother used to say that a life worth living was one spent making things better for others," Marcus replied as he prepared to close the gap in the containment field. Besides, I'm human. We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. For the first time in nearly a century, Zephyrak's scarred features curved into something that might have been a smile. Yes, I can see that quality in you. Marcus sealed the barrier and made his way back through the maintenance tunnels. His mind was racing with possibilities, none of them easy or safe. But he had seen the hope in Zephyrak's eyes when the dragon tasted water for the first time in decades. He had heard the gratitude in that ancient voice. There was no going back now. The next day, Marcus threw himself into studying every system in the facility. He mapped power flows, water recycling systems, communication networks, and security protocols. His crewmates noticed his obsessive behavior, but chalked it up to his usual thoroughness. Meanwhile, Commander Vex was dealing with his own problems. The power fluctuations were getting worse, and his superiors were demanding answers. The facility was falling behind on Dracorium production quotas, and delay meant reduced profits. Worse, some of the extraction machines were showing signs of premature wear. "We need those systems stabilized immediately," Vex told Marcus during their daily briefing. "Corporate is breathing down my neck about efficiency ratings." "I'm working on it, sir," Marcus replied. "The problem seems to be in the deep systems integration. Your newer technology isn't playing nice with some of the older components." It was true in a way. Marcus had discovered that the facility's systems were more interconnected than anyone realized. The same power grid that fed the extraction machines also controlled the containment barriers. The same computer networks that monitored Dracorium production also regulated life support. Everything was connected, which meant everything was potentially vulnerable. That night, Marcus contacted his crew chief back on Earth using the facility's communication system. He needed help, but he had to be careful about how he asked for it. "Sarah, I need you to look up everything you can about galactic law regarding sentient beings' rights," he said during their routine check-in. Specifically, laws about torture and forced labor. "Marcus, what are you planning?" Sarah's voice was sharp with concern. "I'm planning to save a friend," Marcus replied. "A very old friend who's been hurt for a very long time." After the call, Marcus made his way back to Section 7. He had brought more water, but this time he also carried a small tablet loaded with every legal document he could find about sentient rights. If Zephyrak was as old and wise as he seemed, maybe the dragon could help find a legal solution. When Marcus reached the containment chamber, he found Zephyrak awake and watching the entrance with anticipation. "You return, as promised," the dragon said, and Marcus could hear genuine warmth in the ancient voice. "I brought more water and some reading material," Marcus said as he began working on the barrier again. "I'm hoping you might know something about galactic law." As Zephyrak gratefully accepted the second container of water in nearly a century, Marcus explained what he had learned about the legal frameworks that supposedly protected sentient beings throughout the galaxy. "Ah," Zephyrak said after reviewing the documents on Marcus's tablet. "Cleverly written, these laws. They protect citizens, but say nothing about guardians who never claimed citizenship anywhere. We were always above such concerns, you see. We protected all, but belonged to none. So, you have no legal protection? Worse than that, small friend. According to these laws, I am legally classified as a dangerous wild animal. The hegemony has permits for my capture and containment." Marcus felt his heart sink, but Zephyrak's eyes glittered with something that might have been cunning. However, the dragon continued, "There's one thing these laws did not anticipate. They never considered what might happen if a wild animal were to gain citizenship in a member world. Is that possible? It is under very specific circumstances. A being can be granted emergency citizenship if they have provided significant service to an existing citizen, and if that citizen sponsors their application." Zephyrak looked directly at Marcus. "The laws were written to handle refugees and defectors, but there are no species restrictions." Marcus felt a spark of hope. What kind of service would qualify? Saving a citizen's life would certainly qualify, as would providing information that prevents significant harm to a citizen or their homeworld. The ancient dragon's expression became thoughtful. "Tell me, Marcus Chun, do you know what Dracorium is actually used for? Ship fuel and weapons, according to what I've heard. More than that, small friend. Much more than that. Zephyrak's voice took on a grave tone. Dracorium can power weapons capable of cracking planets. The hegemony has been stockpiling it for years, ostensibly for defense. But I have overheard enough conversations to know their true intentions. Marcus leaned forward, sensing that everything was about to change. They plan to use Dracorium-powered weapons to destroy Earth, Zephyrak said quietly. Your world has too many resources they want, and too many humans who ask uncomfortable questions. Genocide disguised as defensive action. The words hit Marcus like ice water in his veins. Earth, his home, his family, everyone he had ever known. How long? He managed to ask. Soon. Within a year, I believe. They are waiting for one final shipment of Dracorium to complete their weapons array. Zephyrak met Marcus's eyes with infinite compassion. I am sorry to burden you with this knowledge, small friend. But you asked about service to citizens. Warning Earth would certainly qualify. Marcus stared at the ancient dragon, his mind reeling. Everything had just become bigger than one creature's suffering, bigger than simple kindness. Now it was about survival, about stopping a genocide, about saving his entire species. Can you prove this? Do you have evidence? I have overheard many conversations, recorded in here. Zephyrak tapped his great head with one claw. Dragon memory is perfect, but proving it will require access to the facility's computers, something I cannot provide from within these barriers. Marcus nodded slowly, his engineer's mind already working on the problem. I can get into their systems, but if I'm going to expose this, I'll need more than just your word. I'll need hard evidence. Then, we have much work to do, small friend. Zephyrak's voice carried new strength and purpose, and little time to do it. Over the next week, Marcus and Zephyrak developed an unlikely partnership. During the day, Marcus performed his official duties while secretly mapping every computer terminal, security camera, and data storage system in the facility. At night, he would return to Section 7 with water and information, planning their next moves with the ancient dragon. Zephyrak's perfect memory proved invaluable. The dragon could recall every conversation he had overheard, every casual comment made by guards, every technical discussion between engineers. Slowly, a picture emerged of the hegemony's true intentions, and it was even worse than Marcus had initially feared. Project Clean Slate, Zephyrak explained on their fifth night together. That is what they call it. The complete destruction of Earth and the establishment of human preservation colonies on controlled worlds. They plan to keep a small breeding population for labor purposes. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. You're talking about slavery. Indeed, they believe humans are too dangerous to remain free, but too useful to exterminate completely. The dragon's ancient eyes burned with controlled fury. They fear your species' tendency to resist authority and ask inconvenient questions. How much time do we have? Commander Vex spoke of a final weapons test in 3 months. After that, Project Clean Slate becomes active. Zephyrak lowered his great head closer to Marcus. But there's hope, small friend. The project requires a continuous supply of Dracorium to maintain the weapon systems. If that supply were to be interrupted, Marcus understood immediately. They can't destroy Earth without the power source they're torturing you to produce. Precisely. And there's another factor working in our favor. The Galactic Council has been growing suspicious of hegemony military buildup. They have demanded inspections, but the hegemony has refused, claiming security concerns. Proof of Project Clean Slate would force immediate intervention. Marcus nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. I need to get into their central computer systems. The really classified stuff will be isolated from the general network. Commander Vex's personal office contains a direct terminal to the high-security network, Zephyrak informed him. I have seen him access it during his visits here, but it requires both his biometric signature and a rotating security key. Biometrics I can fake with the right equipment, but the security key will be harder. Marcus thought for a moment. Unless... Zephyrak, can you affect electronic systems at all? Some kind of electromagnetic field. The dragon considered this. My breath weapon, when I was healthy, could generate powerful electromagnetic pulses. But I'm far too weak now for anything so dramatic. What about smaller effects? Could you disrupt localized electronics if you were close enough? Perhaps. Why do you ask? Marcus explained his plan. It was risky and would require precise timing, but it might work. If he could get Vex to bring his security device near Zephyrak during one of the commander's inspections, the dragon might be able to disrupt it just enough to reveal the current key sequence. This plan requires you to be free of these barriers, Zephyrak pointed out. Something I assume you have considered. I've been studying the containment system all week. It's powerful, but it has vulnerabilities. The main thing is that all the barriers are powered from a single central hub. If that hub were to overload, the entire containment grid would fail, Zephyrak finished. But such an overload would also trigger every alarm in the facility and bring armed guards running. Which is why we need to time it perfectly with something else that would explain the power surge. Marcus grinned with nervous excitement. Like a massive system diagnostic that I'm scheduled to run tomorrow night. They spent the rest of the night refining their plan. Marcus would use his scheduled maintenance access to rig the containment power hub with a delayed overload device, timed to activate during his diagnostic routine. When the barriers failed, Zephyrak would be free to move through the facility for the first time in nearly a century. The next day was the longest of Marcus's life. He performed his routine duties while carrying the components he would need for their escape attempt. Every interaction with Commander Vex felt loaded with hidden meaning. The commander seemed more agitated than usual, constantly checking his secure communicator and making encrypted calls to his superiors. Corporate is pushing hard for increased production, Vex told Marcus during their afternoon briefing. We need those system optimizations completed immediately. Understood, sir. I'll be running comprehensive diagnostics tonight to identify any remaining inefficiencies. Marcus kept his voice steady despite his racing heart. That evening, as the facility shifted to night operations, Marcus made his way to the Central Power Distribution Center. The containment hub was exactly where the schematics had indicated, a massive piece of technology that channeled enormous amounts of energy to maintain the barriers around Section 7. Working by the light of a small maintenance lamp, Marcus carefully installed his improvised overload device. It was crude but effective, designed to create a cascading failure that would look like a natural system breakdown. He set the timer for 2 hours, giving him enough time to reach Zephyrak before the barriers failed. When Marcus arrived at Section 7, he found the dragon waiting for him with obvious anticipation. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked as he began his final approach to the barrier controls. "I've been ready for 97 years, for months, and 24 days, Zephyrak replied. "The question is whether you are ready for what comes after." Marcus paused in his work. "What do you mean? When I am free, small friend, I will not be the same creature you have come to know. A century of torture has left marks on my soul as well as my body. I will seek justice for what has been done to me. Justice or revenge." Zephyrak was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps there is no difference anymore. Marcus finished his work on the barriers and stepped back. "Whatever happens, we stop them from destroying Earth." "Yes," the dragon agreed. "Whatever the cost." The wait for the overload device to activate felt eternal. Marcus and Zephyrak talked quietly about what they would do once the barriers failed. The plan was for Zephyrak to head to the facility's communication center while Marcus accessed Vex's office and the secure computer systems. They would have perhaps an hour before armed reinforcements arrived from the orbital station. When the power finally failed, it happened all at once. Every light in Section 7 went out. Emergency klaxons began wailing, and the containment barriers flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, Marcus heard a sound he would never forget, the sound of a dragon taking his first free breath in nearly a century. "Freedom," Zephyrak whispered, and there was something terrible and beautiful in his voice. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows throughout the chamber. Marcus got his first clear look at Zephyrak unobstructed by barriers, and the sight took his breath away. Even weakened and scarred, the dragon was magnificent, a creature of ancient power and terrible grace. "Go," Zephyrak said, his voice stronger now than Marcus had ever heard it. "I will handle the communication systems and ensure word of this reaches the right ears. You must get that evidence from Vex computers." They separated at the chamber entrance, Marcus heading toward the administrative levels, while Zephyrak moved toward the facility's communication center. The dragon moved with surprising speed despite his weakened condition, driven by fury and purpose that had been building for nearly a century. Marcus reached Vex's office just as the commander himself arrived, probably drawn by the facility-wide alarms. Through the office's transparent door, Marcus could see Vex frantically trying to establish communication with his security forces and understand what had gone wrong. The commander's secure terminal was active, displaying classified files that Marcus could see contained references to Project Cleanslate. Everything they needed was right there, just meters away behind a locked door. Marcus took a deep breath and activated the plasma cutter he had brought for exactly this situation. The door's locking mechanism dissolved under the focus beam, and he stepped into the office just as Commander Vex spun around in shock. "What are you doing here?" Vex demanded, his hand moving toward the weapon at his side. "Stopping you from committing genocide," Marcus replied, stepping toward the computer terminal. Vex drew his weapon, a sleek energy pistol designed to kill efficiently and quietly. "You have no idea what forces you're meddling with, human. Your species was always too curious for its own good." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Marcus said, and lunged for the terminal. The energy blast meant for his chest instead struck the wall behind where he had been standing. Marcus rolled behind Vex's desk as the commander fired again, the shot scorching the floor where Marcus had landed. "The dragon is free," Vex said with vicious satisfaction. "My security teams will recapture it within the hour. And you will die knowing that your meddling only delayed the inevitable." That was when the lights went out again. Not the emergency failure they had experienced earlier, but a systematic shutdown of all power to the administrative section. Through the office windows, Marcus could see flashes of light in the distance, like lightning strikes, but the sky had been clear. "What's happening?" Vex demanded, speaking to his communicator. There was no response except static. A voice answered him from the office doorway, a voice like distant thunder that Marcus recognized immediately. "What is happening, Commander, is justice," Zephyrak said. The dragon filled the doorway, his massive form somehow fitting through the opening that should have been too small for him. His eyes glowed with inner fire, and small electrical discharges danced between his claws. Commander Vex turned his weapon toward Zephyrak and fired. The energy blast struck the dragon's chest and had no more effect than a flashlight beam. Zephyrak looked down at the scorch mark on his scales with what might have been amusement. 97 years, the dragon said conversationally, stepping into the office. 97 years of your people's weapons. Did you think I would not eventually become immune? Vex fired again, then again, backing away from the advancing dragon until he was pressed against the far wall. Zephyrak's great head lowered until he was eye level with the terrified commander. "Please," Vex whispered. "I was following orders." "So were the guards at every concentration camp in history," Zephyrak replied softly. The excuse never changes. Marcus had been using the distraction to access Vex's computer, downloading everything he could find about Project Cleanslate. The files were enormous, detailed plans for planetary destruction, population control, and the establishment of human labor camps throughout hegemony space. "Zephyrak," Marcus called out, "I've got everything. We can prove what they were planning." The dragon's attention shifted to Marcus for a moment, and in that instant of distraction, Vex made a desperate grab for an emergency alarm that would summon armed reinforcements from the orbital station. Zephyrak moved faster than anything that large should have been able to move. His massive claw intercepted Vex's hand just inches from the alarm button. The commander screamed as dragon claws pierced his flesh, pinning him to the wall. "Zephyrak, don't," Marcus said quietly. We need him alive to testify about what they were doing. The dragon looked at Marcus for a long moment, ancient eyes weighing justice against mercy. Finally, he released Vex, who collapsed to the floor, clutching his wounded hand. "For you, small friend," Zephyrak said. "But he will answer for his crimes before a proper tribunal." Marcus finished downloading the files and destroying the originals on Vex system. They now had enough evidence to expose Project Cleanslate to the Galactic Council and prevent the destruction of Earth. But they still needed to escape the facility and get word to the outside universe. "The communication center is under our control," Zephyrak reported. "I have sent compressed data bursts to news organizations throughout the galaxy. The story is already spreading. What about getting out of here?" Zephyrak smiled, an expression that was both beautiful and terrifying on a dragon's features. "Leave that to me, small friend. I have not flown in nearly a century, but I remember how." The escape from Zirian Prime was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. Zephyrak had led him through the facility's corridors to a massive cargo bay that opened directly to the planet's surface. Despite his century of imprisonment and torture, the dragon's wings still remembered their purpose. "Hold tight, small friend," Zephyrak had said as Marcus climbed onto the dragon's back between two massive wing joints. "This may be rough. I am not the flyer I once was." The launch into space had been terrifying and magnificent. Zephyrak's wings, even weakened, could still catch solar winds and ride magnetic fields between planets. They had escaped Zirian Prime just as hegemony reinforcements arrived, leaving behind a facility in chaos and a commander who would have much explaining to do. Now, 3 months later, Marcus stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council headquarters on Centaurus Station, watching as Zephyrak gave testimony before the assembled representatives of 200 worlds. The dragon had regained much of his strength and dignity, his scales once again showing hints of their original emerald and blue coloration. The evidence Marcus had stolen from Commander Vex's computer had proven devastating to the hegemony's case. Project Cleanslate was exposed in all its horrific detail, along with dozens of other illegal operations throughout their territory. The dragon farming program alone was enough to trigger massive sanctions and criminal charges against hegemony leadership. For 97 years, I endured torture so that these beings could power weapons designed to commit genocide, Zephyrak told the council, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "I speak not only for myself, but for all those who suffered in hegemony facilities throughout the galaxy." The council's verdict had been unanimous. The hegemony corporate alliance was stripped of its member status, its assets frozen, and its leadership subject to arrest warrants that extended throughout civilized space. More importantly, dragons were officially recognized as a protected sentient species, with full rights under galactic law. Marcus had testified as well, explaining how a simple act of kindness had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened billions of lives. The council had been particularly interested in his account of human motivations, why his species seemed compelled to help those in need, even at great personal risk. "We have a saying on Earth," Marcus had told them. "It takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to protect the innocent. Humans understand that we're all stronger when we take care of each other." After the formal proceedings concluded, Marcus and Zephyrak found themselves alone on one of the station's observation decks, looking out at the stars through vast transparent windows. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked. The dragon had been offered positions with a dozen different organizations, from the Galactic Council's peacekeeping forces to prestigious academic institutions that wanted to learn from his vast knowledge. "I am considering several options," Zephyrak replied thoughtfully. "The University of Rigel has offered me a position studying ancient galactic history. The peacekeepers want me to help hunt down the remaining hegemony war criminals. There's even talk of establishing a new Guardian Corps, with dragons once again protecting smaller worlds from cosmic threats. What does your heart tell you to do?" Zephyrak was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes reflecting the starlight. "My heart tells me that I am tired, small friend. Tired of fighting, tired of violence, tired of being strong for others. Perhaps it is time for this old dragon to rest. Marcus felt a pang of sadness at the thought of his friend retreating from the world again, even voluntarily this time. You don't have to decide right away. The council granted you full citizenship status, remember? You could take all the time you need. Indeed, they did. Thanks to your sponsorship and the service we provided in stopping Project Cleanslate. The dragon looked down at Marcus with obvious affection. You saved more than my life that night. You brought me water, small friend. You saved my soul. You saved my entire species, Marcus replied. I think we're even. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the traffic of ships moving between the station's docking bays. Representatives from hundreds of worlds were coming and going, conducting the business of a galaxy that was slowly learning to be better than it had been. There is something I want you to have, Zephyrak said suddenly, extending one massive claw. Resting in his palm was a small crystalline structure, deep blue and green like the dragon's original scale coloration. What is it? Dracorium, Zephyrak said simply. But not the kind they extracted through torture. This is freely given, crystallized from scales I shed naturally during my recovery. It will power your ship for 1,000 years or more. Marcus took the crystal carefully, feeling its surprising warmth against his palm. Zephyrak, this must be worth a fortune. Money has no meaning to one who has lived as long as I have, the dragon replied. But friendship, kindness, these are treasures beyond price. Zephyrak's expression grew serious. I want you to know that when I am remembered in the histories, it will not be as the last dragon guardian or as a victim of hegemony cruelty. I will be remembered as the dragon who was saved by a human who couldn't walk past someone who was thirsty. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. You're going to make me cry in front of the entire Galactic Council. There is no shame in tears, small friend. I wept when I first tasted the water you brought me. Sometimes the heart overflows. A soft chime indicated that their transport back to Earth was ready for departure. Marcus had been granted hero status by his government and offered any position he wanted, but he had chosen to return to his old job. The galaxy needed more mechanics who understood that sometimes the most important repairs weren't to machines, but to the connections between people. Will I see you again? Marcus asked as they walked toward the docking bay. I think our paths will cross again someday, Zephyrak said with certainty. The universe has a way of bringing together those who are meant to help each other. At the transport's boarding ramp, they embraced carefully a small human and a massive dragon who had become the most unlikely of friends. Marcus boarded his ship and took a seat by the viewport, waving as Zephyrak's enormous form grew smaller in the distance. As the transport entered hyperspace for the journey back to Earth, Marcus thought about his grandmother's stories. She had always said that dragons were wise creatures who deserved respect, but she had never mentioned how much they could teach about hope, friendship, and the power of simple kindness. Marcus pulled out his communication pad and began writing a letter to his grandmother, telling her about his adventure and the dragon he had befriended. He knew she would be proud that her stories had helped guide him to do the right thing, even when the right thing seemed impossible. Meanwhile, on Centaurus Station, Zephyrak stood at the same observation window, watching Marcus's transport disappear among the stars. The dragon was no longer the broken, tortured creature who had been trapped on Zirion Prime. He was himself again, ancient and wise and filled with purpose. After careful consideration, Zephyrak had made his decision about the future. He would accept the position with the new Guardian Corps, helping to train a new generation of protectors for the small and vulnerable worlds throughout the galaxy. But this time, the dragons would not stand alone. They would work alongside humans and any other species brave enough to believe that the strong had a responsibility to protect the weak. The dragon touched the small communicator he wore around his neck, a gift from Marcus that would allow them to stay in contact across any distance. There was much work to be done in the galaxy, many wrongs to be righted, many thirsty souls who needed someone to bring them water. But for the first time in nearly a century, Zephyrak looked forward to tomorrow. The universe was vast and sometimes cruel, but it was also full of beings like Marcus Chun, small friends with big hearts who understood that kindness was the most powerful force in existence. As he watched the stars, Zephyrak began planning his first mission for the new Guardian Corps. There were rumors of a prison facility in the Outer Rim where beings were being held in terrible conditions. It would be dangerous work, requiring careful planning and probably some rule-breaking. It sounded perfect for a dragon and his human friends. In the depths of space, a transport carried a mechanic home to Earth, while on a space station, an ancient dragon planned new adventures in the cause of justice. Both carried with them the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the entire universe. And in a vast network of communications that connected the civilized galaxy, the story spread of the human who gave water to a dragon, and the dragon who helped save a world in return. It became a legend told on 1,000 planets, a reminder that compassion was the greatest strength any species could possess. The universe was a little brighter because a mechanic named Marcus Chun had seen suffering and chosen to act. And somewhere in the space between stars, dragons flew free once again, guardians and protectors, but never again alone.